Do you know about Fire Emblem? It's a one-of-a-kind series. None of its contemporaries have really been able to capture or emulate the same feeling that you get from playing a Fire Emblem game. Except there was, and Nintendo really didn't want you playing it. You see, as Fire Emblem was getting better with each title, the sales were not. When it came to sales, Thracia 776 absolutely bombed, and the next installment was being planned with 3D in mind. On the Nintendo 64, a console that the creator of Fire Emblem had a massive hate boner for, I don't know why. Assumingly because of creative differences, the original creator of Fire Emblem, Shozo Kaga, decided to part ways from the Nintendo partner developers Intelligent Systems and made his own game studio called Turnanog. Kaga, while thinking about all the new and innovative ideas he could explore with his new company, he remembered, wait a second, I can just make another Fire Emblem. This is genius. And so he did. They started making a spiritual successor to Fire Emblem simply titled Emblem Saga. Apparently, they finally doused the fire. However, there was a bit more than spirit being placed into the successor. There were direct connections to previous Fire Emblem games. Kaga even said in an interview with Famitsu that it was going to be set in the same world and time as Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, which is the first game in the series, memorable to most for being the game that the cute female girl Marth in Super Smash Bros. Melee is from. When he was asked whether or not he would have characters from previous Fire Emblem games cameo, he alluded to the shapeshifter Zane playing a large role, and went on further to say, quote, since the game occurs in the same time period as the first game, more characters may return if the need arises, even directly referencing the main protagonist's likeness to Marth. But Nintendo, like a mother opening up her son's mail, was starting to find some shit they didn't like. Emblem Saga was being promoted, and there are quite a few documented examples of it. Live-action TV commercials that were in
Man kan ikke leve uten kjærlighet.
German? Famitsu articles probably helped that Enterbrain, the publishers of the game, also owned Famitsu at the time. Though promotional trailers released online for Emblem Saga may have been lost or buried, the residue is documented at the very least through PlayStation's old Japanese website. And hell, there was a playable demo called Emblem Saga Prelude that let people play through the first couple chapters. There was enough talk about Emblem Saga that even some Western game news was paying attention to the development. But with that came the ever so watchful eye of Nintendo as well, as they started seeing similarities that they weren't too fond of. The game was originally slated for March 29th of 2001, but ended up being delayed to May 24th the same year for quality assurance. And during those extended months, shortly before the game's release, its title seemingly changed out of nowhere. Tear Ring Saga. Under the influence of a possible Tipper-Scene D from Nintendo, Turnanog and Enterbrain changed the name in hopes that it would deter any legal dispute as the game was finally released. It didn't though. They got sued, like 3 different times. Despite removing references and visual similarities to past Fire Emblem games, as well as changing the title by the time the game released, Nintendo being Nintendo and, a tiny bit protective of their properties, sued Turnanog and Enterbrain for 258 million yen in damages, along with the demand to prohibit all sales of Tear Ring Saga. But their lawsuit failed completely in Tokyo District Court, and Tear Ring Saga continued to successfully sell as somewhat of a sleeper hit. Nintendo sued them again, this time taking it to Tokyo High Court, where Turnanog and Enterbrain were found guilty and fined 76 million yen for not adhering to the Japanese unfair competition prevention law, due to the game being promoted publicly to seem like it had a direct connection to Nintendo's IP. And it makes complete sense why they were fined for breaking that law. But more importantly, Tear Ring Saga was considered to not be infringing on any copyright in its finished state, so the game was still allowed to be distributed. Nintendo tried again in Supreme Court, but it upheld the previous court's ruling. This was a precedent-setting lawsuit, a precedent that Nintendo surely wasn't too happy about, one that still gives Japanese game developers an important legal security when creating similar spiritual successors. Despite all the legal troubles that surrounded the game after release, it ended up selling around 345,000 copies in the first 2 months. Despite its success in Japan, it never received an English release. I wonder why.
My son,
Yes?
I'm not touching that with a 60-foot pole. Next caller.
Unfortunately, we don't have an official English release, but through a combined effort from some really talented people, a full translation was completed through the hard work of the user Ethan and all these other amazing users that contributed significantly to the complete translation. So if you want to check it out, I'll put a link to the download in the description, though it won't come with a ROM of the game because the last thing that I need is another legal case to talk about. If you don't have a legal copy, Google. is your friend. But if you're not that interested in trying it out yourself, I'll tell you right now what this game is and how it holds up. To put it bluntly, it's classic Fire Emblem, but instead of being in a small, gross 16 bits like the SNES games, it's in big boy, big dick 32, and it looks really good. Put this on a CRT, and I'll let that goddamn hottie take me out to Olive Garden. The game starts with the classic 5-minute intro of text that sets up the world of Tearing Saga a bit and installs a fear in you for the most frightening sounding villain ever conceived. The Dark Lode. It takes place on this continent, Liberia, that holds several different kingdoms that all pretend to like each other like it was a holiday, and those asshole in-laws were there, and you didn't want to cause any trouble even though you have a ton of beef. Then Billy got a little too drunk, drew up a couple pentagrams, and started breaking the Geneva Convention again. The Zhou Empire decided that all the people that weren't them probably deserved to die. And like what any super relaxed militaristic empire under the influence of a cult would do, they invaded and killed thousands. Conquered kingdoms. I feel like I've seen this before. And you know what? I think that's a telling sign that this truly is a Fire Emblem successor. I'm sorry, they reuse stuff all the time. It's classic stuff, but it still works despite the pretty cliched plot. Runen and Holmes are the two playable protagonists who are heirs to principalities in their kingdom, of which have fallen to the devil freaks. Runen is literally Marth with browner hair. They actually had to change his original hair color because he is practically the same character, a strong and righteous prince who wants revenge for his fallen father and state, while Holmes is just like, fuck this, I want to be a pirate, that shit sounds fun. You start off following Runen as he begins to build strong allegiances with powerful allies through military accomplishments, and slowly procures a small organized army by recruiting mercenaries, allied soldiers, enemy soldiers, childhood friends, child soldiers, all for the sake of taking down the Zhou Empire. God damn, brother, I'm feeling patriotic. Though as you progress and learn about the history of the world, you may find yourself faced with the realization that the whole continent has been fucked up and corrupt for a while, making you question how black and white this war truly is. There are politics, an impressively large cast, drama, romance, violence. This story has it all, and I personally found myself very invested. Kaga, while clearly repurposing old ideas, a lot of repurposing, he, if nothing else, is very talented at creating a breathing world. Take one look at his secret blog, and you'll probably understand why. It's like he has 8th grade syndrome. He gets super invested into the world he creates, and it ends up pulling you in along with it. However, this game has a surprising amount it wants to show and tell you. Involving over 100 characters, it can be kind of overwhelming if you're not used to the older styled Fire Emblem games, where the UI isn't so friendly. It personally took me a while to memorize certain historic events and important figures my first time through, as I was playing it over the course of a couple months. Though at times, it may feel like a lot to take in, this story does deliver some really great politics, dialogue, and a strong main cast. Especially Holmes. I don't know why, but every time he just tells people to shut up and that they suck, I can't help but feel all warm inside. The most interesting part about this story, though, is how it is presented through two different protagonists. As Runen is creating a reputation as a strong leader and building his army in a fight against the Zhou Empire and Grexel cult, Holmes just fucks off for a while and pillages treasure as a pirate and overall just acts like a cunt. God, I love him. Seeing these two very different characters cross paths and support the same cause in different ways is extremely interesting to witness unfold, and also opens up a lot of fun gameplay changes because of these two separated stories. Segue. The gameplay is very similar to Fire Emblem games prior. If you've played any Fire Emblem game, you are going to understand this game fundamentally. It's a turn-based strategy role-playing game played out on a grid overlaying a map of varying terrain. Each map incorporates a different locale as you move around the overworld through story chapters. Each chapter usually has the same goal: defeat the enemy or seize a key structure, to effectively destroy everything from devil-worshipping Dark Knights to deadly pacifist priests that you end up bullying into a corner and mugging their belongings off of their fucking corpse. You have to recruit your own soldiers through varied means and level them up by having them murder anything and everything. Units are unique in several ways. Recruiting units require unique circumstances, such as having specific units talk to each other, going to obscure buildings in a town, or completing a chapter in a specific manner, just to name a few. While many of these units might share the same class, they all have different base stats and stat growths that can make them more useful than others within that same class. Units also have personality to boot, though some are not as fleshed out as others. Most are never forgotten, having opportunity to shine despite many being forced to one-dimensional personalities, except for a few that have like no personality at all. God damn, I hate them. Also, at times you can really tell a lonely middle-aged man wrote the female female characters. It can be kind of cringy, but gives you a good laugh every once in a while. Occasionally, these personalities play into actual mechanics of the game, like Raquel, a skilled hunter who refuses to murder anyone because of a vow she made. This means that she can never kill an enemy unit on the battlefield, which is a really cool mechanical restriction that has an even more unique way to lift that restriction, because if you recruit her brother Ruka and force her to watch him get murdered in cold blood, she goes a little crazy and starts murdering people, which can make her the best archer in the game. She is honestly one of the most unique characters in any Emblem game, and this idea has actually been stolen by later games in the Fire Emblem series. Or Plum, as one of the most unassuming characters in the game. She is the epitome of harmless, which makes her the perfect target for potential kidnapping. By purposely sending her into slavery, she becomes one of the best support units in the game when you later save her from her kidnapper. Through this experience, she becomes a dancer who can give any unit another action in the same turn and the chance to boost their stats. It makes her extremely valuable for that skill alone. You know what they say? Kidnapping builds character and all that. Tiering Saga incorporates the whopping 62 possible playable characters pretty well, and the cast that amasses can be quite compelling. They are given a bit more characterization by way of decent epilogues and relations through support conversations, and no, before you ask, these support conversations don't play out like an official war dating simulator like some other popular Fire Emblem games. And thank fucking God, the last thing I want to see is another forum thread about overrated ships. Fate was a mistake. These supports are concise and don't require you to have units fight next to each other to achieve, which saves me time, so I'm all for. These supports come about by either having two characters interact with each other on certain chapters, or automatically through events in between chapters as long as they are both alive in the same group. These supports are very useful outside of the flavor text, because they give the supported unit stat advantages, and God knows you'll need them. Stats are very integral to the gameplay. Any advantage, even small, could be the difference between life and death. In Tiering Saga, much like Fire Emblem, death is permanent, so increasing stats whenever possible is necessary to keep your army from dwindling down to a prince and a priestess. Every time that you level up a character, they gain 1 point in any of their main stats. Strength, which increases damage dealt from physical weapons. Skill, which increases hit rate and crit chance. Speed, which increases hit evasion and attack speed, allowing for possible double attacks. Luck, which increases normal evasion and crit evasion. Defense, which mitigates physical damage. Magic, which not only increases damage dealt and health healed from tomes and staves respectively, but it also mitigates magic damage by half of that unit's magic stat. I mean, you could have just added resistance. It's not that hard. Mastery, which allows units to use more powerful weapons, and max HP, which is self-explanatory, and surprisingly, but very rarely, movement, which determines how many tiles a unit can move. All of these stats are randomly gained on top of their base stats. Lady Luck is the one that truly decides whether the unit you've been leveling up ends up becoming more powerful than God themselves, or if they end up being a benchwarmer for the rest of their life. But not being born a victim of genetics is very important when it comes to being close to useful. Sorry, Lady Luck can only do so much when your growth rates look like my chances of getting a girlfriend. Every character has their own base stats, but they also have their own stat growths, which means that one character might have a better chance to gain, let's say, a point in magic every level, while another has almost no chance at increasing magic. But it can still happen, even if you don't want it to. Some characters are just bad though, and no amount of luck will truly save them, unless you try really hard. Take Bilford for example, a cuck-armored unit with only 3 movement, a low but balanced stat growth, locked to using swords with no physical range weaponry, and lackluster base stats. One may think he could never amount to anything at all, though Bilford has something that many units don't have, aside from the chiseled chin. He has a 5% chance to increase movement, a very low and rare stat growth for a unit to have, but odds I would always bet on. Get lucky enough and you may just get a tank with the agility to outrun horses. Send him into the front lines, have him get attacked by every enemy on the map and almost die. Profit. How do you profit, one may ask? Well, Bilford comes with a skill that gives him increased critical hit rate to lower his health, so the closer he is to death, the more alive I feel. Skills are a huge game changer, and most of them are damn good, though they are locked to each character and class with the exception of some chapters where you can have a finite amount of skills taught to any unit, or by using some very, very rare skill books. Also, using some very rare potions, you can increase stats as well, or use items to promote units, netting large stat increases along with an increased level cap. Any other stats come from weapons and items your unit has as equipped. Another thing to note about tiering Saga is that there is no weapon triangle, even though something introduced previously in SNES Fire Emblem games. Instead, the main differentiating factors of any weapons or tomes are their physical or magical property, range, weight, damage, and accuracy. There is a wide variety of weaponry. Some can even provide incredible boons to the wielder, and can even counter enemies completely through class effectiveness. But weapons break. Need a weapon? Well, you better have the gold to buy one. Don't have enough gold? Participate in blood sports. Taking too long? Gamble your earnings away on a coin toss with a high luck unit. Increase your treasury by 1000%. Evade your taxes and never worry about running out of weapons ever again. On paper, weapons breaking should guide you to use them sparingly and strategically to get the most value possible. But in this game, it doesn't matter in the slightest, as getting gold is extremely easy, money bags and item drops are somewhat frequent, and villagers naturally hand items out if you give them the time of day. So supply never really runs dry. While recruiting, gearing, and leveling up your army is all dandy, what if that army was split? That's right. There are two different protagonists in this game, which also means two different armies to control. During different sections of the game, you can send units from Runin's party over to Holmes and vice versa, which, depending on who you transfer over, you can drastically change who is recruited and how your army develops. It also allows you to balance your army by sending lower leveled units over to Holmes' campaign to level so nobody gets outclassed. Runin's route is on rails in how you proceed. You have to go from mission to mission. There is no time to stop and smell the flowers except for the occasional city armory. But Holmes has a bit more freedom in how you proceed on the overworld map. While the main missions are still very straightforward, you are given free roam opportunities to involve yourself in, such as skirmishes and mini dungeons, which are simple fights on simple maps so you can grind for EXP and items. For inexperienced players, this is a great handicap to easily level, but is honestly pretty unnecessary with just how much you can get from the main chapters. And these skirmishes are so basic that it will make your brain go numb when they're in between you and actual missions. They can be very invasive. There are differences that can come up by having or not having certain units in one route that may open up new opportunities in the other. These opportunities can be pretty obscure though unless you already know about them. A good example is with the Kreese and Latina subplot. If you send Kreese and his compatriot Arcus to Holmes' group at the first reunion and visit the town Verge, Kreese will encounter the woman Latina by chance. If you return a few chapters later with an elixir in his inventory, another event will trigger. Visit a third time with a miracle charm in Kreese's inventory, where he once more gets medieval ghosted, and Latina will finally reveal to her sister-in-law that she is in love with him. I guess you could say, third time really is the charm. A few more chapters later, and guess what? We're still going back to Verge, where it is revealed that the blind girl set off by herself to find Kreese. Yeah, it makes sense. Don't question it. Send Kreese back over to Runin's army and have him defeat the mercenary Mark, and he'll direct Kreese to the inn nearby. Have Kreese go to the inn, and you can recruit Latina into your party. If you didn't do any of that, you would recruit another cleric instead. But surprise, surprise, she'll leave the party with or without Kreese if you didn't recruit a mediocre axe unit into your party very early on, where there are many better options. If you just never sent these two units to Holmes in the first place, none of this could even occur, and it drastically changes some epilogues and your own roster. Stuff like this is incredible, and I think it gives a bit of replay value as there's quite a bit to miss depending on who you recruited and which group they traveled with. When it comes to difficulty and enjoyment value of these two routes, I would say I prefer Runin's route in every way aside from the story. I found myself more invested in the adventures of Holmes more than I did with Mr. Birthright over here, but the maps I enjoyed the most were always in Runin's. A lot of the chapters in Holmes' route felt one-dimensional and narrow, being focused on attrition as there was less options on how you went about going through the maps. Not to mention the mundane and grindy skirmishes that get in the way of actual progression, an immense amount of EXP that can easily overlevel your units that takes away challenge via limitations, and a large focus on easily beaten but annoying monster mobs were terribly boring. You rarely, if ever, had to think too hard. And while I would argue that this game in general isn't that difficult, Runin's route has some exemplary maps that focus on some intriguing gimmicks that you have to play around. Most notorious for its difficulty is Chapter 34, where you have to cut off infinitely spawning reinforcements by standing on the tiles they spawn in on, while dealing with an insane amount of long-range artillery on top of one of the strongest boss units in the game. By cutting off reinforcements, you're also cutting off half of your aggressive force, which is actually a little stressful until you catch your footing. However, by the time that you get to these more difficult maps, you'll be able to abuse all the most powerful units and weapons in the game to turn something that would normally be difficult into an absolute cakewalk. Having trouble with the boss, you can just use a thief's dagger to steal everything in their inventory and leave them a sitting duck for you to pick away at. If that's a little too risky for you, you can just warp directly in front of him, kill him within 2 turns with a tome that can't be countered, and then warp rune in to capture the stronghold before the game can even catch up. This game gives you too much at your disposal with so many amazing skills and weapons. In a way, it's pretty entertaining to see just how much you can do, but also takes a bit of the challenge away. Unique weapons are busted, skills that you can teach to any character break the late game completely, and half the clerics break this game with staves that can boost stats for an entire chapter to insane numbers, completely nullify enemy magic users, or fucking warp. The balance isn't perfect, and to top it all off, Saga opted to do a gallon of meth before making the hit percentages for this game. You see, the actual percentage of a character hitting its target is not actually the exact percentage shown to you. The game lies. I had a whole lesson plan on true hit, but for time's sake, I'll just show you the quote-unquote curve for hit chance in tiering Saga. What is this, you may ask? Was this curve drawn by someone with an unmanageable tremor? Well, this is your unevenly distributed odds of landing a hit on an enemy. Saga decided to make some questionable adjustments to the 1RN system. Instead of rolling a number 0 to 99, it uses a table of 100 numbers to determine hit chance, with a lot of doubled up and missing numbers. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. To have a hit land, the rolled number must be equal to or less than the displayed chance, which means a displayed 10 or 11% chance to hit is really a 3% chance. That is because the only possible RNs on this chart that are less than or equal to the displayed 10 or 11% are 0, 1, 0, 8, and 10. Couple this with many doubled up numbers and you get a very unconventional and non-uniform system. It is very messy for almost no reason, but for normal hit chance, I don't really have too much of an issue with it. However, it uses the same system for critical hit chance as well. No Fire Emblem game has ever used true hit to calculate critical rates. It has always been and still is a 1-to-1 rate. A 30% chance to crit is a 30% chance. However, in tiering Saga, if you, let's say, have a 13% chance to crit, you really only have a 5% chance to crit. This largely makes crits worse in general, as the skew doesn't benefit you until you have an ungodly amount of crit chance, and if you have that much, your unit is probably almost dead. Even though the true hit is very stupid in its implementation here, Saga did do it first. Fucking trailblazer. On the plus side, the art style and animations look great whether you're hitting or not. But for all their beauty, they take a long time. Mostly dark magic spells for some reason. Turning the lights back on just fucking takes forever. At the very least, you can turn them off for the most part, but hope to God you never have a catapult target you, because for some reason, the overview animation takes longer than the detailed one. The sprite work looks fantastic though, and the portrait art is in its classic Fire Emblem-esque style. The music score fits the setting well, but I wouldn't say there's anything that stands out too much. There are no especially memorable tracks, but it does set the mood well enough. There's also a neat little versus mode that you can use after beating the game, where you can send in the team that you've built up on one memory card and pit them against other teams on other memory cards, which I assume was made with the idea of duking it out between friends with their own save data. Settle it and smash? No. A true intellectual settles it in tiering Saga. Has the same amount of sorties in it anyway. It's a fun 2-player game mode with some unique maps, but I have only one controller and no friends, so it's like playing chess against myself. And the only thing I hate more than losing to other people is losing to somebody who looks just like me. How do I feel about this game as a whole? The story behind the scenes of tiering Saga is both interesting and important. The game itself, while nowhere near perfect, is pretty damn enjoyable despite its flaws. Overall, pretty good. I'd say if you got nothing better to do, give it a go. And don't get me wrong, there are some things that I really don't like about this game, but there is something inherently charming about this knockoff Fire Emblem that I can't help but enjoy myself playing it. Also, staves don't miss, and there's no fog of war. 10 out of 10 game. Godspeed, Saga. Glad to see you're still making Fire Emblem spiritual successors to this day in RPG Maker. You're doing God's work, buddy.